Martin, thanks for accepting the offer to have this conversation today. We are calling this series the Ministry of Future Affairs. And the idea is to get to know one another and talk about topics that are professional, that are Armenian, in a conversation format. And so I want to start a little bit exploring your past. Just give the audience a sense of your upbringing. What were you like as a teenager? How were you as a student? The formative years. What can you tell us about yourself?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me. About upbringing, I just grew up a couple of 100 meters from here when we were doing the interview. And I would say we were a very ordinary family in very difficult circumstances because I grew up and I was 13 when the Soviet Union broke up. And then I was getting ready to go to the university. There was no electricity, no gas, country was in war. So, and then I chose to become an economist, though there was a short discussion with my mother whether I should be a doctor because she is a doctor, and then, but it lasted for a couple of seconds, and then we went on. And then the interesting thing about those times was that our professors, to my understanding, were reading the same books that we were reading, because they were trained in Soviet economy, political economy part, and then they were not used to this market economy textbooks. So we're learning together. Probably that was fun, but I would say that one thing that gave me a confidence and the knowledge was my entering of the central bank, because I joined central bank when I was, I think, year 4 at the university.
Ah, okay, so right off the bat. So let's explore that. Maybe go a little bit before you joined the central bank, and even when you decided to become an economist. What did you think an economist did?
So it was very vague understanding of what usually economists do, because we're in a transition from Soviet structure to more market-based structures. And I would say that I gave a tribute to a fashion of that time, because many of us growing up and then learning here and there that economists and lawyers would be the ones who would be running the country, running the business. So it was probably more on a fashion side, but when I get into that, I loved it because it's a social science, and then you have a mixture of hard and soft ones, which gave you an understanding of how society behaves.
And also just think back at your formative years, college, just before college. Did you get a sense that you wanted to be a leader, or was that not something in your calculus?
Honestly not, but when we were growing up, it was very common to be among friends in the yard. So I grew up in the yard, and then this social connections with people gives you an immense experience for your future life, because you are dealing with guys who are older than you, you are dealing with guys who are younger than you, and then you are in a structure, societal structure, which always evolves. And then to find your own place there, you need to fight, you need to be smart, you need to deal, you need to negotiate. That's how you become who you are, basically.
And how about sports? Other interests?
Several. I started with swimming, for competitive swimming, for around 5 years. Then I did football, and then eventually I ended up doing boxing.
Oh, wow. So that's a big part of your life then at the time. And then we're going to go into talking about your great career at central bank, etc. But just to stay back there a little bit. So you also had the experience, and I've had the experience because I left Lebanon in the civil war. And one of the things I remember is that I was observing the change in my parents' lives. Not in my life, I was much less aware of changes in my life because I had never lived before those years. Do you have memories of how your parents were coping with this sudden change as adults and responsible adults with kids, etc.? How was that?
It was extremely difficult. I remember vividly what my mother was doing every morning. She was a doctor, and her hospital was like probably 10 kilometers away from my house. So because there was economic collapse and no electricity, most of the time she was walking there, literally. So she was walking there and she was coming back, walking like 20 kilometers per day to make a living for us.
At the same time, kind of did they express aspirations for the change that's happening, or were they kind of saying, let's hang on and survive this period?
I think, like every Armenian family and every Armenian mother, for say, is like they have their aspirations embedded in their children. So one thing that you learn from them is like you should always learn, you should always study and do your best. That's the way forward.
Absolutely. Well, look, let's come then to the decision to join the central bank. You said you joined during your studies, during your college years. So how did you think about that? Was that the only path for, you know, smart economic students? Were there many other choices? Just tell us how you looked at also the public sector in some ways versus private.
So at that time, there was not a distinction between public and private for me, but I was writing a paper on something related to financial markets. And I think it was my cousin who said, why don't you come and join us at the central bank? There is a group of people who could help you with your paper. So I joined the team, I wrote my paper, and then the head of department liked me in a way, and then he said, why don't you stay with us and do an internship?
Do you remember what the paper was about?
It was something related to forwards and futures in the financial markets, which was something unknown at that time. And then I was trying to explore what the forward rate is, what the future rate is, that type of things. And then the only literature that you could find in Armenia at that time was the American University's library and then the central bank. So that's why I joined the central bank in a way.
Good library.
And then there were very smart people around, very young. I remember then when Tigran Sarkisyan became the head of the central bank and Bagrat Asatryan was like touring him just to make this transition smooth. So they entered our room and our division chief was on I think it was like 6 months internship at the HSBC London. So the guy who was heading the division at that time was 25. I was 20 and there was another lady who was 22. And then Tigran Sarkisyan's reaction, the first probably honest reaction was like, this is kindergarten. So
how old was he?
Like that.
10 years older maybe?
I think he was around 30 something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, those are exciting days, hard to replicate.
Absolutely.
And so, when was this roughly? Just what year?
It was 1998.
98.
98, and then I joined the team as a permanent staff in 1999, right after the graduation.
And this was around the time there was some shocks in the Russian market, right?
There is a funny story about that as well. So we wrote a paper about what's happening in Russia. Tigran Sarkisyan read it, and then he said this should be delivered to the prime minister. And somebody in our secret department, I don't know how to call it in English, but these guys who are doing this type of thing. So they put it top secret on that. They put it in an envelope and they told me that whoever wrote the paper, there were 2 of us, should go and deliver it to the prime minister because prime minister may open it immediately. And then Armin Darpinyan was the prime minister. And then he might ask questions. So you should be there in order to answer the questions. So we went to the government. There was a government meeting. We gave it to him, no questions. We came back, and on the way back, a lady from that division realized that none of us is a permanent employee of the central bank. And she was shocked. It's like non-employees cannot deliver top secret documents. Then that guy got a permanent contract, and because I didn't have diploma from the university, which was necessary, I was given a permanent contract a year later.
That's funny. So that was good comes out of bad situations. That's right. So you know that you've been at the central bank for quite a while, and obviously a lot has changed. At the time, what were the big issues? Because there wasn't really an advanced banking sector. There wasn't, you know. So what were the things that were? And it's interesting sometimes to go back and think about how far we've gotten. So that's partly why I'm asking.
So in a retrospect, probably I need to give a huge credit to my predecessors. All of them did an absolutely amazing job. So Bagrat Asatryan started with an institutional setup. So in 1996, Parliament drafted a law about the central bank, which stipulated, to my understanding, 2 critical things which laid future for the bank. One was that central bank was not allowed to credit the government. So we're not allowed to print money and hand it to the government, which we're doing during the war times. And it helped us to combat inflation, which at one point in Armenia was around 5,000%. And the second thing is that the salary of the central bank employee should be equal to the mean of the banking sector employees, which made this competitive thing between us and the commercial side of the business. And then when I joined, I think there was a big cleanup of the banking sector, because at one point we had 100+ banks in Armenia, and then several of them were problematic, so we're cleaning those up. And then during Javadian's tenure, I think we just started with the global financial crisis of 2008. And that was a big shock, and then we had another shock in 2014 and 15.
No, I mean, no question in my experience in the country over these years that one of the highlights is the financial sector's development in a country like this, and I think the biggest credit goes to the role the central bank has played. I think I've long viewed it as a competitive. It's to me also a role model of an institution that the likes of which the country needs in every aspect of its overall economy and society. Because if we just build up many such institutions, the country definitely will be better off. So that's all your predecessors who I've happened to know and have watched at a distance have exactly as you, and you've continued it very well. So maybe just kind of going a little deeper into the unique challenges a central bank role offers, whether you're running it or whether you're part of it, and that is the kind of making decisions as an independent body, but within the context of political, societal expectations, pressures, you name it, in a country where the culture of such relationships doesn't exist. It's brand new when you started out. So, what can you say about what it feels like to balance these things? If you're in the private sector, you can ignore most of those things or take advantage of them. If you're in government purely, but you don't have to deal with private sector, you just make up laws, but you're kind of in between.
No, absolutely. I think one of the things that distinguishes even my current role from the role that I had in the board or previously in the executive side of the business is that you are the ultimate decision maker, and then when you make decisions, you are trying to balance all the interests. So we are somehow dealing with two issues, one of them being inflation, which is again becoming a big trend now and a big problem around the world. So currently Armenia has around 10% inflation, which is extremely high to what we have lived through. And then now, because we have been with very low inflation for a long time, I think many people don't remember what the high inflation is. And that's very difficult to explain to our general public that whatever we do, rough things, increasing interest rates and so on, it's in their core interest, because what US has lived through or Armenia has lived through, the periods of high inflation, it's devastating. So we cannot let inflation go up. There are certain countries, even in our region, which are trying to go against the economic mantra. And then, for example, Turkey has inflation around 70–80%, which is extremely high. But I think that low inflation for Armenia is a must, and that's what we negotiate with our partners in government, in business, because at this point, you know that there is an appreciation of national currency due to inflow of many people who come to Armenia for business or leisure. And then the exchange rate appreciated, and it makes problems for private businesses. And that's where we need to find balance in a way where we generally balance interest of general public and an interest of business. That's one thing. Second thing is the financial stability. And then I think we did an exceptional job during the war, because it was very heavy on us to realize that there are very few anchors which are left in the country. And one of the anchors is the stability of the financial sector. So we did everything to prove and to tell our public that we are there, we're in place, and then we stand for them.
Great clarification and insight. In your role, in both parts of your answer, you were kind of referring to the role you have in educating the public, informing the public. Of course, central banks are very careful about what they say because people tend to overinterpret it. But in a country like this where living with inflation is not something that businesses have a lot of experience with either, how do you kind of try to get the overall education of or awareness of business in broadly? How much of the central bank's mandate or mission is that, and how do you do it?
I think compared to the times where central bankers were seen as the secretive guys who are making decisions behind closed doors, and then everybody were looking at what color is Alan Greenspan's ties at that day,
exactly.
Is it red or blue or whatever. I think now for your own policy to be effective, you need to communicate it perfectly. So it will be probably 10% policy, 90% communication at this stage. And then you communicate to general public, and then you communicate to business. So for example, I've met the representatives of business community last week, and I'm giving 8 press conferences per year, that is for sure, on inflation after our decision comes out. So that was our deliberate decision to have those press conferences, and through press conferences we're trying to pass our message across.
Obviously, over the last 20 years, a lot of development has happened in the country. A lot of policy has kind of adjusted to enable some of the progress that we've seen, but we have a long way to go. Part of that is the unique kind of situation we're in, and it's unique in many ways, where we are, the other cross currents that affect us, and also this kind of broader Armenian context, diaspora, people bringing investments, etc. So how does that factor into what you do? I mean, is 95% of 99% of what you deal with just like the local economy as it relates to the rest of the world, or do you get pulled into thinking about the specific uniqueness of Armenia? And I'm interested in how you deal with the unique aspects of it.
So probably I'll share your question into 2 parts. One is our daily business and our interrelations with the central banks and the financial system of the world. Though it may seem that Armenia is somewhere in the middle of nowhere, a very small country, but even when Fed does a decision on interest rates, that highly affects Armenian decision as well, because there is this risk premium which should be adjusted and so on and so forth. So we're very much into local, but also at the same time very much into global. Regarding not only central banking, but the knowledge and expertise that we should gain, we should be only striving to the frontier. We can't be mediocre. That is not an option, and that's what we're preaching. That's what we are living through, and our main idea, which is embedded in our strategy, is to be the best in the world in monetary policy making, for example. And for that, you need to have interaction with the bests of the world, and that's not an easy thing to do, because you are somewhere in a remote location. But at the same time, I think we did have very big success with our diligent training and research center, which you have visited several times, where we are able to bring the best of the world to work with our own people around the topics of mutual interests. And that is probably the critical thing, that the interest is mutual. So people not come from out of patriotic discount or that type of things, but people come because they think that they can do work with locals on an issue which is global and interesting.
Very good. So then maybe sticking to that issue, you've also got a lot of geopolitical things to factor into the equation. Maybe we come right to the present and all the different forces that are at play. You know, we thought we were going to have a post-COVID, economic kind of consequences, supply chains, all that was somewhat foreseen, but maybe even inflation. But then you add to that an unexpected war, a ideological schism that has developed between countries and, of course, Russia, etc. And of course, you know, Armenia sits in these awkward crossroads between all sorts of different forces. What's your view on the moment? I mean, this interview can be watched 10 years from now, and I think probably the more interesting thing for them would be just to have, just like we remembered when you were a kid and the Soviet Union kind of transitioned and the uncertainty and so how does it feel now that you're the adult in the movie, if you will?
So if you allow me, I'll start with our own economic policy, which we did. So we were probably the first country in the world to increase the interest rates. So we did it in December 2020, and we increased it by just 1%, which is a big step, because we were expecting inflation to come. And then I think we were also the first one who were seeing the inflation coming down. So November 2021, we had a peak of 9.6, December 7.7, January 7.4, February 6.4, and we're almost at the target, which is 4%. And then another conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and then here we go again, roller coaster. So which is obviously makes us to think about geopolitics, as you said. Because now, I'll give you an example, we do have many visitors, most of them are Russians. And now we need to understand what are their plans. Are they going to stay for 3 months? Are they going to stay for 1 year? And that's a different type of policy making regarding their period of stay. If they stay for a long period of time and they treat Armenia as the center of their economic interest, that's a completely different policy. If they decide to leave Armenia in a couple of months, and then that's a different type of policy regarding the foreign exchange market, regarding the business and so on. So we're constantly keeping our finger on the pulse to see what's going on, and geopolitics is obviously part of the equation.
Although, Martin, if you think about it, what the policy may influence their decision to stay, and you want their staying and not influencing the policy. So how do you deal with that?
So what we did, we get together with several Armenian friends from McKinsey, from Moscow office, and then we did a study on what keeps people here and what may somehow influence the people's decision to leave, and what can government do. And then we presented to the government to create a task force on trying to understand the reasons of people being here and then difficulties that they're having here, and try to find answers for those questions. Some of them were related to the financial sector, what we're trying to solve, but the rest was also partly on the government side, and government works hard to do that.
That's very interesting. I would say, you know, just happens to be that we're having a discussion in the middle of this moment, but I think the more that can be said about that, and the more there's a discussion that the business and public sector know about that, I think the better it is, in the sense that everybody's wondering what to do with the situation, how much it's being influenced or is influencing what we're doing. And I'm glad to hear that it's being kind of proactively dealt with, because I really do think this could be a really significant opportunity for Armenia's development. At the same time, it could also be a missed opportunity, which we can study historically, except it may not happen again, because you're not going to want to see this kind of dislocations very often. So maybe just kind of sticking to that general theme. So, you know, you mentioned the word futures a little bit earlier, and I was reminded that in the financial sector, the notion of futures exists. You know, as you know, a lot of the projects that I've been involved with respect to Armenia constantly put the future kind of on the table, because of this general observation that if all you do is just fight with the present problems, the future happens, as opposed to you get to decide what future you want. How do you think about the future in your decision making, in your both professionally and personally? What's your relationship with the future?
Our solution to the future is based on our team effort. So because future is extremely unpredictable, volatile, and then you can never think about things that are happening currently. So what we're usually doing, we're trying to be the best of ourselves and getting ready for the things that could come on our way. It's not that we're trying to figure out what would be the task in 6 months or 8 months or 5 years, but first and foremost, we're trying to prepare ourselves with a toolkit, with an expertise, with the knowledge, being able to solve the problems which will be coming on our way.
Very interesting. And so in that regard, coming back to the Armenian context, the unique Armenian context with diaspora, maybe say a little more about, I know you've observed, you've participated in discussions about how the broader potential resources of Armenians around the world could respectfully affect the situation here, meaning improve it. What thoughts do you have in that regard? What could be done differently? What should be done? Any thoughts on that dimension?
I think it is extremely important to have a two-way street with the diaspora. So we shouldn't be looking from Armenia to diaspora as a cash cow, excuse me for my jargon, but at the same time, probably diaspora should not treat Armenia as a second or the third cousin. So we should be very respectful to each other, we should be listening to each other and find a common ground and mutual interest and work on that. So Diligent Training Center is a very exceptional example of that. So we do have people from diaspora, distinguished academics, who are coming and spending their time with us in Diligent, which to my understanding they immensely enjoy because they are among smart people, they are contributing to the development of their motherland or Armenian state. At the same time, they are pursuing things that is in the domain of their own interest. So if you find that type of unique conjurance in a way, it gives you a focal point where you can bring forces together with a common vector of development.
Now, in your professional life, obviously you're dealing with all the present and the immediate future. Do you allow yourself the once in a while the thought that, okay, 10, 20 years from now, what kind of Armenia am I going to live in? Do you have thoughts about that you can share, even if they're not coming from your central bank hat, but just as an individual? What could you describe if a 5-year-old today said, what am I going to grow up into 20 years from now? What could this place look like?
So my understanding, first of all, it's not a compliment to you, but I always listen to what you say. Because from where you sit, you see it much better than we see it from here. And then I think my answer to the 5-year-old is that one thing that we should be constantly concentrating on is productivity. It seems like a very small thing, but in order to be productive, you need to do your homework properly and do all the things, human capital, other type of things, and so on and so forth. So the understanding of future comes with the notion of Armenia being a hub for talented people who pursue their dreams in this country. So we need to create an environment where pursuing your dream from this country is possible. And then people move here, and then there is no sacrifice, huge sacrifice in moving here. You are here because there is a talent around, because it's safe, because it's the country you like, because it's the nature is lavish, and then we are green, and then we can produce things which are organic, and so on and so forth. So many dimensions, education, health, and so on. But the point is that without making a huge sacrifice, you come here because this is a place where you can pursue your own dreams.
That's a really terrific answer, and I think it's great because the answer contains a level of imagination, but that's constrained with practicality and experience, and that's what we have to do. I think what I find often is that if you always focus on the present often doesn't allow imagination to play a role, because imagination sees things that are completely different and yet you feel like, well, I don't know how to get there, and it's never going to happen. And also the lack of confidence, right? I mean, where do you get your confidence from? Like the answer you just gave is a confident answer. It's humble, but it's confident. And the question, I think, as a, that what I realize, as a country, as Armenia as a country, a young country, it has to find a way to be confident. And because it turns out in business, in the worlds I live in, startups that are confident end up having a much higher chance of success, no matter what they're doing. It doesn't guarantee success, but the startups that are not confident constantly question everything they're doing in case they're not doing the right thing, and you just cannot stay with it. So I think development in the future in Armenia is going to require people like you, others who just can say, you know what, we may not get it right, but we've got to believe this can happen. So I think that's really key. Let me kind of, maybe I'll end on a personal, imagination related question. You said your mother and you had a 1-minute discussion along the way about whether you should become a doctor, but you really were drawn to economy. An economist was, the profession you entered. You've reached one of the top position in this country. If you weren't an economist, and if obviously you weren't in this role, now that you've lived the 20 years you've lived since then, what would you now imagine yourself being?
As a field of study, probably what I will do now, if I was like 13-year-old Martin,
exactly.
Probably it will be math at the beginning, and then philosophy and psychology as a second
So
thing.
the social sciences.
Social sciences.
And then profession-wise, again, we take out doctor and we take out economist and probably lawyers, maybe less than what you thought it would have been 20 years ago in the society. So what would you have what would you leap to? I'm not saying you're going to, I'm just saying in an alternative world, right?
Psychology fascinates me.
Psychology.
Yeah.
And that manifests in so many ways. You can write as a psychologist, you can help other people, etc.
Probably not the clinical one. But
yeah, exactly. Well, look, it's been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you even better.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you,
Martin.
Thank you, Noubar.